Yes.
So before we jump into the meat of everything, I want to just, and for those who do not know, my name is Rachel Tanner. I'm the Assistant Director of Planning and Development Services and have been working with the team on the NBCAP since it came on board midsummer last year. And the working group has been working since before then. And so I want to thank you all for your service. And I hope that you all recognize the tremendous amount of changes this project has been through, the different left and right turns we've had to make, and the milestone that's tomorrow, which is the Planning and Transportation Commission meeting. And so I hope, even though maybe the plans and alternatives don't meet all of your wildest dreams, I hope they have some of them in there. And I hope that you feel really proud of the work and the time that you've dedicated to this effort, to the civility that you've demonstrated to each other, to the listening that's happened. And I hope that we can keep that happening tonight and into the future. So just want to say thank you to all of you for your efforts and your work. It really is. I know sometimes it doesn't feel so momentous. We can't have a big party, but hopefully maybe this time next year or earlier, we can have a celebration of NBCAP and get together maybe in the plan area and celebrate the great work that everyone's done. So really, really thank you. So yeah, you can go ahead to the next slide. Thanks. So the purpose of this meeting is to provide time for working members before the Planning Commission tomorrow to get questions and answers related to the PTC staff report. You know, the PTC meeting doesn't really have a lot of allowance for back and forth discussion. We do hope all of you will come and make public comments or write to the PTC if you can't attend, but you won't really necessarily have dialogue. So that's what this meeting is about. We want to review the modifications made to the alternatives, describe some of the Parkland standards. I think that's been a topic of discussion, and we've been doing some more research as well. There's also been a proposal for development at 200 Portage Avenue, which is a new address, unfamiliar to us. But for those of you who have seen, that is on part of the formerly Fry's site, the 340 Portage, on a portion of that. And then talk about future working group meetings.
All right, so this is Jeannie.
I'm going to hand it over to Jean Eisenberg. She's been a part of our team and she's been helping. She's a consultant we've been able to use because unfortunately we had some staff departure. And so we've been able to get a little bit of extra help with NBCAP. So go ahead, Jean.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So this slide may look familiar to everybody, and I want to say that these numbers have not changed, but you may recall that we compared potential development in each scenario, and each scenario from 1, 2 to 3 increases the amount of housing units that may be developed and increases the amount of office and commercial and retail space that may be developed. We also see the amount of park space increasing over the 3 alternatives as we anticipate more development and more sites turning over. And so these numbers, again, are unchanged, but what I wanted to go through, and I'm going to flip screens here. It looks like, let's see if I have permission. Yep. To show you what has changed based on the feedback that we got from the working group at your meeting in October. And so I know you can't see it yet, but just orienting you, I'm just going to briefly go through where we were with the previous set of alternatives and what's changed on the current set that the Planning Commission will be reviewing. And then again, these tables at the bottom that you've seen before, that those build out numbers of potential development is unchanged. So zooming in here, one key change was that you may recall that we were proposing the tallest heights and densities on El Camino Real, and there was feedback from the working group that we had proposed to potentially remove the requirement that exists now under current zoning, that when a property is within 150 feet of an R1 zone, the height is limited to 35 feet. So in this scenario, we've retained that requirement. So on El Camino, in this condition, height is restricted to 35 feet because it's adjacent to the R1 district. And so you'll see that change repeated in all 3 alternatives. Instead, the tallest heights and densities and the bonuses that may be allowed are permitted further south of Acacia. So we've got that 50-foot height limit and a potential for up to 70 feet if there was additional below market rate housing or workforce housing provided, depending on the alternative. The second key change is the transition at Ash Street. So if you look at these parcels that are showing up in blue along Ash, those are actually currently zoned for office or light industrial uses. Residential uses are not currently permitted there. And that was not shown correctly on the previous set of alternatives where they were showing up as yellow bubbles, meaning they would be residential. So in this scenario, we've retained the existing zoning, and in that way, these parcels become a transition between the taller heights that may be permitted at 395 Page Mill and the lower heights that are under current zoning in the R1 district further west of Ash. So you see that repeated across all three alternatives. As we move into alternative 2 and 3, there's a couple changes to Park Boulevard and to the Olive Street zoning. So you may recall that we talked about a potential rezoning on the east side of Park Boulevard adjacent to the railroad tracks. And we've clarified that here with the color and the notes that in order to redevelop these sites for residential use, rezoning would be required. The current GM zoning on those parcels does not currently allow residential. The other thing we've clarified that was related to questions from the working group is really what's happening at the olive frontage. So as you may recall, these parcels have contiguous ownership. So these are typically single-family homes that are being rented, and these property owners own several parcels that could be consolidated. And so the assumption here is that if the zoning changed here to allow 4-plexes in the case of alternative 2 or 6-plexes in the case of alternative 3, the assumption is that these lots would be consolidated. So you wouldn't necessarily see that development happening on a single parcel, but because one owner owns several contiguous parcels, we've assumed lot consolidation there. And then lastly, there were questions about the scenarios alternative 2 and 3, where the cannery building is proposed to be partially or completely demolished. And so we clarified in the report to the PTC how that would actually happen procedurally. And since that it has been identified as a potentially eligible historic resource, that would need to be analyzed in the CEQA document and identified as a significant unavoidable impact if it was to be demolished accordingly in the plan. And what that means is the City Council would need to adopt a statement of overriding considerations. They would essentially say that the conditions and the desires in the plan are such that we override that significant unavoidable impact. And so again, that's clarified in the PTC report. Lastly, in terms of transportation improvements, we haven't proposed changes to this map. Sorry, it's taking a minute to load here. And again, as we discussed at the working group meeting, right now the alternatives are primarily focused on land use. Once an preferred alternative is selected, that's when the traffic analysis is going to happen, and that's when these transportation improvements will be further refined. So I'm not going to spend time on this last row, just to show you that the build-out tables that are shown in the PTC report are unchanged in terms of those numbers. So the changes that we made that I just went through in the previous set of slides did not change the potential development outcomes. Rachel, unless there's anything further you want me to go through here, I'm going to ask Claire to switch back to the presentation.
I think that's great.
Okay, I will pick it up now.
So this is the same 3 alternatives that are in the staff report sent to us on December 4th.
Yes.
Yes, just last week. Okay, so I'm going to just do a quick overview of some of the public park standards that we have. So in the city, we have 2 particular documents that are guiding, that provide some guidance on how we should do our public parklands. So the first one is our comprehensive plan, and there's policy C 4.6. This one cites a 2 acre per 1,000 residents standard for developing new parkland. And the other document,
that site cites 4 acres per 1,000. I have it open on my screen right now. It's 2 acres of neighborhood parks and 2 acres of district parks. It's a total of 4.
okay. So, so we're talking about individual parks. So there are 2 different kinds of parks. One's a neighborhood park, like you just said, and one's a more regional park. So when you go back and look at the standards for the information that was provided earlier by Perkins and Will, we were focused on a neighborhood park in that information that was provided. So let me just finish this and we can kind of, I think we'll kind of get some closure on it. So the Parks and Rec, there's a Parks Master Plan, and that policy 1B cites a 4 acre per 1,000 residents. And this is the standard that we've been talking about these last several months for how to look at projects. And we've been talking about that with our NVCAP analysis. So these are guidelines that are put in place and they're not codified. So they're not legally binding when a development comes through. But there are some standards that's in our code, and I'll mention those now. So basically we have some standards that apply to when a project has a subdivision or when there is no subdivision involved. When there's a subdivision, which is usually the majority of our projects, all of those projects, whether it's commercial or residential, they pay into the park development impact fees. So park impact fees. The exception to that would be for ADUs and JADUs that are less than 750 square feet. So basically the majority of all the projects that we see in the department do not involve subdivisions, and those projects pay into the park impact fee fund. And that fund basically is, assembled over time and put in place so we can seek out opportunities for park improvements and potential locations or acquisition of new parkland in the future as the city kind of explores those options. Now, the other one is related to when there is a subdivision. So when the subdivision is involved for a residential project, now we're talking about ownership units. If the subdivision has over 50 new parcels or condos, then there's a parkland dedication that is required with that subdivision. If it's 50 or less, then they have to pay the in lieu fee. And as the developer, you can actually do a combination if you wanted to pay fees or give some land, and that can be negotiated, with that project. Now, the ratio for the parkland dedication is 5 acres per 1,000 residents. So as staff goes, we haven't been following that as closely as we should have been. So I think we're going to go back and take a look and see how that kind of influences some of the things that we've been generating and the analysis that we've come up with so far. So you can see here when it's a parkland dedication requirement, it's a 5 acre per 1,000 standard that is used for those projects. All right, so let me move on to the next slide. So the public parkland in this area, that we basically have some large parks that we know are located on the Fry's parcel and on the Cloudera site. We have some small public plazas that we've strategically located throughout the different areas. And we have the creek improvements, we have some landscape setbacks, and then the shared street concept with the Wuna going down Portage. So open space is also generated through some dedication of some of these properties. So we have like a 10 to 20% dedication on the large parcels, depending on which alternative we're going with. And then there's a 5 to 10% for dedication on the other tier 1 and tier 2 sites. And so that just kind of depends on the size of those sites. And lastly, a quick overview of 200 Portage. So we received a proposal on November 18th. It's called a pre-submittal application, and it's coming in under an SB 30 project. So we're expecting that so we've got this informal application, but the formal application is expected once we go through our process that we currently are in. This project involves 85 townhomes, and with 185 parking spaces, and it takes up approximately 4.6 acres of the 12-acre site. Under the SB 330 standards or regulations, once they submit this project to the city, what it does is it locks this project into the standards that we have currently today. So this is a way for a developer to kind of preserve and know exactly what the expectations are, and legally we can't start changing what the development standards have to be for the project. So currently it's under an RM30 development standard, and the other code requirements that we have would be applicable that are in place today for the project. And this project is currently under review by staff, and I'm not sure what the next steps will be, but it's still under its initial review process. All right, and then Rachel, you want to do the wrap up?
Sure. So our next steps are going to be, we invite everyone and hope you will participate in the PTC meeting tomorrow on December 9th. This starts at 6:00 p.m. We're also going to ask the PTC to continue the hearing to January 13th. The PTC has to end their meeting tomorrow at 8:30 p.m., which is much earlier than their normal time. And so they're going to need some more time to discuss this and to develop the recommendation for City Council. So it'll be continued to January 13th, which is also Wednesday, again, starting at 6:00 p.m. We really encourage you to actively engage with the City Council and with the PTC, whether it's via emails that you might send if you can't attend. If you are able to attend and give public comment, you'll have 3 minutes tomorrow at the PTC. And it's just great for them to hear from you for things that you support and want to see them keep in, for things that you'd like to see them change. They really will benefit from hearing your voices. As far as the future working group meetings, after the City Council, we go to PTC and then City Council. We're hoping to go to City Council in March, and that they would identify what they believe is the preferred alternative. And we'll go and be able to have those studies that we have in our scope with our consultant team. And really that will help us refine the project. And so when we get to that stage, we would like to regroup with the working group, both to share what the scope of the studies might be, to make sure that you can have some input there. And then also once they come back as they're, what do the studies find? So we want to keep you all engaged there. And then once we have those studies back, we'll be able to maybe make some further refinements or adjustments to the concept plan and take that back to the City Council for their approval, and then really developing it into the plan and the EIR scope and things like that. So those are some stages we also want to involve the working group. So you'll have a hiatus for a few months, but hopefully you won't delete our email address or put us into your spam folder, because we will be reaching back out again in the spring to re-engage as these things keep going forward. If something's come up in your personal life, you're not able to attend or can't really be part of the working group in the same way, please do let us know. We want to make sure that we're able to hopefully have everyone's voice continue on as we go into the future. Is there a next slide, Claire?
Nope, that's it.
Last one. So Claire, do you want to orient folks for this evening in terms of how we want to do comments? And maybe we can have, in the meantime, you can go to the Miro board, Jean.
Rachel?
Yes.
I'm sorry, it's Doria, Zuma. I have my hand up.
Oh, sorry, I can't see the
Oh,
hands
no,
right
that's
now.
okay. It's complicated to understand how we do this. But it is not correct that the Planning Commission meeting will be truncated and over early tomorrow night. Actually, that has been changed. So I just thought I'd like to correct that.
Was it changed this afternoon?
I think it was changed last night, but
No one's
we can-
notified myself or the co-chair, so I'm not sure who made the change.
well, so the meeting was going to be cut short because there were Planning Commission interviews scheduled for the same time, but now those interviews have been put off. So I don't think there's any.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I don't think there's any. So, I mean, not that it makes so much difference, but people might want to know that it is not going to be a short, unnecessarily short Planning Commission meeting tomorrow evening.
Okay, thank you for that information, Dory. I didn't have that. And I will say, not that the PTC should continue, but they may continue it. So if whether it gets settled tomorrow or continued, we'll let you know. But you should definitely show up tomorrow anyways, because it will be, I think, an important hearing, even if it is continued, to which the PTC could continue it even without staff recommending. So
Sure.
you never
I
know.
just wanted to clarify.
No, that's great, Doria. Claire is going to just orient us to how we're going to do tonight, and then I do see some hands, but we'll kind of get to those in turn. Claire?
Okay, so first we're going to start off with any oral communication. So if we have any speakers, we're going to go for 3 minutes per speaker. And then once we go through that, then we're just going to rotate through the working group attendees with 2 minutes per person to ask questions so we can get through everybody. And then if we have more time, we can do a second round. So Vin, any public speakers tonight?
If you are a member of the public and you are here to speak on public comment, you can raise your digital hand or press, I think it's at *9 if you're on the phone. I don't think we have any phone callers, but if you'd like to give public comment, now is your time to raise your hand, and Mr. Van Nguyen will call on you.
Yeah, we currently do have one raised hand from Cedric. Is it okay if I take over the screen and put up the timer?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay, so our first and only speaker will be Cedric. Cedric, if you're there, can you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to speak so soon, but I did have trouble finding the report that you guys prepared. I had an email for it or something once, and then had trouble finding it again. So I think it'd be good if you were to update the website that is the kind of the project website for this, so people can find that report. I think that would be helpful. Yeah, and I guess I'll leave it for that for now. Thank you. And thanks for all your work on this project.
Okay, thank you for your comments. It looks like we don't have any other raised hands for public comments.
Thank you. So let's see, how many, I'm not too sure, we didn't take a roll call, so I'm not too sure how many.
So we have eight attending working group members.
Great. Chitra, you do want to kind of just work through the list to kind of get everybody to have their turn, or have everyone have their turn?
Yes, I can do that. Okay. So the first speaker is Doria Zuma. You're the first one.
No, sorry, I had my hand up earlier because I wanted to clarify the planning commission meeting tomorrow evening, but I don't have anything to say right now. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
I know that Gail raised her real hand. I saw her on the picture. So maybe we can go to Gail and then Waldeck.
May I ask, shouldn't we take roll call and understand if we have a quorum? It's a Brown acted committee. Are we not doing that anymore? Or?
So
No,
we can take roll, but if we don't have a quorum, we've also set the agenda as such that we can conduct the meeting as a community meeting if we do not have the quorum.
Okay, do you want to take roll, Chitra?
yes.
Thank you.
Angela Della Porta.
Here.
Kristen Flynn.
Here.
Terry Halsemer.
Here.
Gail Price.
Here.
Heather Rosen. Lance Smith. I think
Here.
Yes.
Here.
Yunan Sang. Tim Steele. Lakiba Pittman. Si Zhang. Alexander Liu. Keith Rectal.
Here.
Doria Zuma.
Here.
Walmir Kaminsky.
Here.
We have 8 people attending the meeting, so we do have a quorum. Thank you. That's the end of the roll call.
Thank you. Okay, Gail, do you want to go ahead and start with your questions?
Okay.
or comments?
Yes. will this, the slideshow or the presentation you have here on the shared screen, will that be the presentation that's given to the Planning Commission?
No, we have a much more extensive, for the Planning Commission, we're going to bring them up to speed from giving them a lot of background and kind of walk them through everything. For this group here, we've already done a lot of that already, so we did not spend a lot of extra time with background information today.
Okay, and I have questions about what was presented earlier, but I'll hold off on those right now and go to some other questions I have. Is it possible to share what the Cloudera property owners might be thinking regarding development or redevelopment of their site?
That's a great question, Gail. We've asked them, what are they thinking and what are they open to? And they're continuing to watch the process and see what we're coming up with and kind of how that would align with what they would be willing to do. So we're hoping that they'll stay engaged, and as they see what's happening with PTC, they'll give us feedback. But we are going to all property owners that have larger parcels and asking for their feedback on the plan.
Okay, and the other thing is, will further feasibility studies outline the impacts of greatly restricting or reducing office square footage over the next 5 to 20 years?
When you say impacts, what do you mean?
Well, when you have strategic economics look at the different land uses and square footages being proposed in the different alternatives, will they continue to work and give additional information regarding the pros and cons of greatly restricting or denying additional retail in some of the alternatives over the next 5 to 10 years?
Certainly strategic economics will continue to be our partner in evaluating the financial feasibility of any of the plans. And I just ask because the impacts of office can be different depending on what you think an impact of an office is. So yes, they will continue to look at the financial feasibility of restricting or allowing more offices and or retail uses in the plan area.
Okay, and the last quick question, because some of my time is related to responses, as you know. The other question is, in the GM zone along Park, it's being considered for potential residential. Have there been inquiries regarding that, or is this a concept that's come up with discussion with the working group?
I think several times it's come up in the working group. I know Doria Zuma has mentioned a couple of times, and there already is that office and housing development at the corner of Park and Page Mill as an example. And could that be something that could be continued on those other parcels? And so I think it's a good question to explore.
So it's concept. There haven't been real people asking. I mean,
not that I'm aware of, other than the proposal that already was approved and constructed. So
okay, and we're all real people. I mean
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
The applicants. Okay, and the last quick question on the alternatives. When it gives the height restrictions in the different alternatives, one of them, alternative 2 and 3, I believe, talk about a height restriction, including the density bonus. Now, that issue of the density bonus could apply to other properties within the NVCAP area, could it not?
The way the density bonus that we've structured in terms of the workforce and affordable housing, or we're proposing, is only on certain properties. So it's not applicable everywhere. There is a state density bonus that's a different thing, which is applicable in many parcels across the state of California, but that's a different density bonus.
State density bonus would apply to other properties within the NVCAP.
Certainly, yes.
And that does or does not exceed 70 feet.
The state density bonus is like a percentage of your base project. And so it really kind of depends. It's not a specific height or specific standard in that way. So I'm going to move on to Waldeck. We did a terrible job of keeping Gail on time, so that is my bad. We're going to try to keep to 2 minutes so we can just get to everybody. And I know people will have more questions, so we'll come back around for a second time.
Okay, thank you,
Gail.
Indulging these questions. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Waldeck.
Hey, so I have concern about the fact that we are not freezing the projects in the area. So all our planning could be pretty soon irrelevant if other applicants going to do the same trick that it just happened on this 200 Portage. Is there a time limit that this freezing of the current rules apply when they set the application? So that's my first question.
Yeah, I would have to look a little bit more closely at that, but certainly they need to be working diligently on an application, and so you can't just like freeze it and then just go away for months and months and not be submitting anything. So there would be some restrictions. We'd have to look closer at the state law to know what that restriction is.
Okay. The second thing is, so we are starved for park areas in our area, and there is this pay in lieu rule about parks. And honestly, I'm not interested in parks somewhere on the peripherals of the city. So if we are not getting our parks where we live, how this thing even works with all the city planning?
That's a great point. One of the things we did propose, and like we can propose further restrictions, is that any park fees collected for development in this area would need to be spent within this area, so that they can't just go into some citywide fund, but they're really dedicated to this area.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Not from me.
Okay, thanks, Waldeck.
Our next speaker is Angela. Do you have any questions?
I do, but before we begin, I just want to ask, so my 2 minutes is just for me to ask questions and for you guys to reply, because I have like 5 different questions.
Should ask Claire, what was your idea? Sorry.
Well, I think we've already started it that way, so let's just go for it. Maybe ask your priority questions first. We've got, it's already a little bit after 6, so we want to make sure we get through everybody.
Okay, all right. So first, I just want to say that I have already written to the City Council regarding being aware that all of our work would be irrelevant. And I would encourage everyone else to. In fact, I did send a request, I thought, to the MVCAP email asking everyone to see my letter that I wrote to the City Council. Is that, did you get it, or what's the situation there? So that people could see what we can say to the City Council regarding holding off on approving.
Chitra, did you receive that?
Yes, I did receive it. And I think, did you already respond to that? I think you responded.
Well, I think Angela wanted it to go to the group, is what she's saying.
Yeah, I wanted it to go to the group.
I can send it around then.
Anyway, certainly everyone should feel free and in fact encouraged by me at least to write to the City Council and say, we've been working hard at this for years now, and we hope that our work is not moot at this point because of these applications. My next question is, which one shall I choose? Can we include, we worked very hard at coming up with a lot of options for providing the funds that wouldn't be needed to pay for affordable housing and also for park space. And yet the only thing that's included in these alternatives is the density bonus and perhaps these impact fees. Is there any way to include some of these options, or is it just not part of a staff plan that one shares with the PTC or the City Council?
I think that's a great point, Angela. I think part of what we are trying to get from this round is the high level concept of what direction are we going, because a lot of those strategies can be applied to any of them in terms of how to finance the affordable housing and the park space. So I think that's kind of how staff see it, is that those would be an all of the above list of things that we can pursue to do the housing and the, whereas the density bonus is enacted through the zoning and through the code. And so it's kind of a little bit different, and it also kind of breaks our 50-foot height limit that we have. And so it would be like a more of a decision point whereas many of the other options either are already available in the city or would certainly be applicable depending on what direction we go.
And regarding Valdek's idea that we stipulate that the park impact fees be used in the NVCAP, I totally support that. And can that be included in the report, the staff report?
I believe it is in the staff report, but it might be in an attachment.
Okay.
So
All right, thanks. Sorry it took so long.
no problem.
Doria, are you ready? You're the next one now. Do you have any questions, Doria?
No, I'm gonna let, I have a different position here and I get more of a voice because I'm on the planning commission. So I'd rather let everybody else speak tonight. So I would like to give my 2 minutes to Angela or Kirsten or Terry or anybody else who wants to speak, who needs more time. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next speaker would be then Keith. Keith?
Yep, I'm here. Sorry,
Okay.
Unmuting.
Okay.
Yeah, I was glad to see the fact that the heights along El Camino and Page Mill are now within zoning specs. I think that's good. Also, it's good to see the park, the option for making that into residential along Park. I think that'd be a really good location. I think you could get some density there without affecting neighbors. So I think that's a good idea. Still, let's go back to the park thing. I think it's really deceptive to say that the comp plan calls for 2 acres per 1,000 because it clearly says 4. It breaks us into a neighborhood and district, but we're adding so many people here that we'll be able to add a district park here. And so that does directly apply to North Ventura. And it also makes the park master plan look out of step with the comp plan. They're consistent with each other. And when you show inconsistent specs or requirements, that's much easier to dismiss. They both say 4, and we should, in good faith, try to work towards that and not necessarily make all the developers pay for that, but the city may have to be on the hook for it. But we should be challenging to the city council to find the space for this and find the money. So I think that's really deceptive to the way it's presented right now. And also, go ahead.
Just for clarification, the comp plan policy that I'm citing is really dated. It's from the late 90s. So I know for a fact that what's cited in the comp plan needs to be updated, and probably what I'm thinking is what's in the parks plan is actually more reflective of, what standards would be. So I totally hear what you're saying. The way that I was looking at the comp plan is I see them as 2 separate things. Each park services a different like an area, like one's a half mile and one is a mile. So I'm pretty sure that we're looking to have parks that service, a half mile area of the NVCAP, but we don't need to kind of maybe focus too much on this right now, because I think we are looking at the project with a 4 acre per 1,000 standard is what we're striving for.
Okay, I think you should make that clear though, because we don't have that right now. We're not meeting that standard, and it makes it look like we don't really need to, and we should be in good faith trying to follow both the comp plan and the master plan.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm not being very, very tactful about how I'm saying this, but as I mentioned, I know we have our guidance. These are our guiding documents that tell us this is what we should be striving for, and this is what we should be trying to work towards the best that we can. There's many policies and goals within the comp plan that, unfortunately, we can't meet everything. And oftentimes, not often, but there are times when things come into conflict, and it's a balancing act where we have to say, well, we have to weigh the pros and the cons between meeting one goal versus another goal. So I think we're in this kind of situation right now where, we've got competing goals and policies. So this is where we need the direction from, the Planning Commission and Council for what they see is to be important for the NVCAP area as well.
Exactly, and they should be making that decision. And right now, the staff plan does not raise that point. We should be saying, should we be following this? Right now, we're just saying we're not going to follow this, and that's 2 different ways of attacking the problem.
Saying that, but maybe Rachel, you might be able to speak more to that with your backgrounds.
I think it's okay to let Keith's comments in terms of that's his perspective on it. And so, you know,
Okay.
I don't want to debate it with the time that we have that's limited.
Okay. Keith, are you done?
I just want to echo what Angela was saying also, is that we're looking at workforce housing, which is really good. But apart from that, we're not doing anything else for affordable housing. And that was important to the neighbors, and that's just been ignored.
Well, I want to just point out, we're doing a bonus for affordable and workforce housing, and then the 15% of affordable housing would still be part of it. So the city is the landmark in that. So,
but none of those go to the bottom two layers. They all go up to 120%.
If it was 100% affordable housing, it would reach to the lower tiers. But again, that depends on folks being able to propose and build affordable housing.
Yeah, and without the city pushing that, it's not going to happen.
And Claire, I think that you said this thing right. There are competing priorities. I just think that within our working group, parks was very high on that list. So if we have a competing priorities, this one should be one of the top ones.
Understood.
Okay. Our next speaker is Kristen Flynn. Kristen?
It's Kirsten.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay, I answer to anything close. You don't grow up with a name like this and not get flexible.
Don't we all suffer from that?
Well, yeah, Chitra.
Yeah.
Like, how many ways are there to mispronounce Chitra? So many. I think the changes that you made are reflective of what we wanted you to make, given the feedback I think that you got. I don't really have a question. I just have a comment that it is frustrating to put all this work in and then have this project. Because, oh, I feel so manipulated by Tim, like, oh. Anyway, it's a good way to make your best volunteers pissed off. And number two is that I think I wish perhaps that in the staff memo, and it's hard not to, and perhaps Mike can speak to this when public comment, is that our highest priorities were bicycle and other alternative transportation, affordable housing, and parks. And I just want to make sure that they know that. So I guess that's a good opportunity to write a letter or to speak in public comment. And I'm afraid I don't have any questions. I mean, I cede my time to Angela.
Okay, so our next speaker would be Lund Smith.
Okay, sorry, I'm toggling back and forth here. I'm looking at the alternatives because I have some questions here about that. Sorry, let me try to pull it up again. Okay, so just a couple of specific questions on the alternatives. And I know I've seen this a number of times now, but now I'm just focused on the language. So for instance, on Olive, I'm curious in alternative 2 and alternative 3, where we talked about 4plexes and 6plexes assumes lot consolidation. I'm just curious if we've gotten specific. So for instance, let's say in alternative 2, it's a 4plex lot consolidation. Does that mean 2 per lot still? Or does that mean 4 per lot? Or what exactly is the breakdown in terms of density when you're talking about lot consolidation? I'm just curious if you know the answer to that.
Dean
and
or Claire,
then,
do you want, okay, go ahead, ask your other question and we'll come back.
and then my other question is in alternative 1, there's several areas that are marked as mixed districts in the orange color, the lighter orange color. And it says office and commercial remain until no longer in use. So I just want to clarify, I think what you mean by that is until like we propose some sort of a redevelopment for the site, because let's just say a warehouse goes from office and it's no longer in use. You can't just magically turn that into a apartment complex. So I assume you're talking about until we come in with a redevelopment application, the office remains until that, until there's another proposal on the table.
Yes,
Just want
so
those to
I'll
clarify.
answer your second question first. It's the simplest. You're correct. The first proposal is essentially slowly eliminating any office uses from the plan area over
Got
time.
it.
So when they go
Okay.
away, they can't come back. Clara, Jean, on the first question of the 6-plex and 4-plex and the lot consolidation note.
So the lot consolidation that we're referring to is that just so you've got two lots that are coming together to create 4 units. So the idea is, I guess you're still thinking it still would be like maybe two units per parcel, but the idea is to combine those 2 lots together to have 4 units on that parcel. And then it's the same thing for the 6 units. You would let's say combine 2 units together, or sorry, 2 parcels together to generate 6 units on that 2 parcel consolidated into 1 lot. Yeah. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. So then my next follow-up question to that then is, so with R1 zoning currently, due to California law, an ADU, a JADU, and a single-family home can be built on an R1 zone. So if it switches to R2, how does that impact ability to do ADU and JADU?
So ADUs and JDUs are permitted if there's a single family use on the property already.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Terry, you are the last speaker for this round.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I have the same concerns that everybody else has about the fact that we now deal with 200 Portage as kind of a surprise for everybody, and how that throws a monkey wrench for everybody. It really impacts all the other alternatives that we want to do. How that impacts us is, I don't even understand why this thing came to us so late, but it did. So, we have to deal with it, I guess. The park issue that Keith already mentioned, I mean, it's critical that we have parks, and especially if you're adding more density to the NV cap area. If you want more density, you've got to have more parks. So, that's something the city should be thinking of. If you want the density, you have to have the parks. Lastly, I'll mention the historical aspect of this thing. I think in this report, I think I went to I must have gone to page 10 or something, 11, before any historical aspect of this project was even mentioned. And so that's a disappointment. I was hoping that in the beginning, where you mention evolving opportunities and constraints, certainly one of the constraints is the importance, the historical aspect of this site. And that's barely mentioned in the first 10 pages of the staff report. And I think it should be much more front and center. And it should be more visible to the city staff. It should be more visible to the PTC, and it should certainly be more visible to the city council. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Terry. I appreciate those comments, and certainly things we can highlight in our oral presentation. And I would just share, we are all surprised by 200 Portage. So I remain optimistic that we can develop a plan that for the rest of the parcels is meaningful, but it certainly is a challenge for these alternatives.
Okay, so next I see Angela's hand up. So Angela, you have the floor now.
Thanks. Yes, I just wanted to actually take advantage of the time that Doria donated to us, if I could. Would that be all right?
Yes, sure.
Thank you so much. So yeah, first I wanted to follow up on what Valdek said about the parks, that the parks are a big priority for all of us. And I think that is something that we all spoke about at the last meeting. And I was really pleased to see that you did mention that in the staff report, that is something that matters a lot to us. But it occurs to me that the reason that there was not as much park space included in those three alternatives is the economic feasibility that you mentioned. And again, since there were all these other options for creating different revenue streams, we should really emphasize those different revenue streams in some way, it seems to me. I don't know how possible that is or how to do it, but the fact that there are different ways of raising the money should be made really clear to the city council and to the PTC, if possible. So I feel very strongly that we all feel strongly about the park space. And I want that made very clear that there are ways of doing it. Another question I have is, I'm really concerned about the transportation plans that are in the report. And I would like to somehow be part of a discussion about them. How can we get involved in the transportation plans and the continuing studies of the transportation plans?
That's a great question. So again, we have our kind of an overview of our idealized, areas we'd like to see improved and intersections we want to see improved. So what we really need to understand is what council directs us to study further. And then when we know that, then we'll have that scope developed of what needs to be studied in relation to like how many people, et cetera, et cetera. So that'll be another kind of one of those springtime conversations once we see the direction council gives us.
So we will get to participate in that.
Sure.
Yeah. Excellent. I'll wait till it's my turn again. I have another question, but I don't want to monopolize.
I'm not sure if anybody else has any questions because I don't see any hands up here. So anybody wants to speak?
Yes. So sorry, coming back to the parks again, but it's kind of strange to me that we have a standard for the city, and I doubt that more expensive parts of the city have a cheaper land for parks than our area. And how come they could afford to have parks and suddenly they're running out of money when it comes to Ventura? So I just don't buy that argument. If there is a way to have a park in other parts of the Palo Alto, there should be a way to get it in Ventura as well.
I think that's a fair argument. I would note we haven't had many major housing developments. And so I think that is reflective of the fact that it is very expensive to build housing due to either the fees or to the provision of the park space. And so I think that has limited our housing development in Palo Alto.
Okay. So it's Kirsten one more time. 1 minute.
So I wonder whether it would be possible to put any additional parkland into option one. I guess it is what it is, but it does seem severely underparked, and it is adding 500 bodies to this area, which will add a lot. I mean, it could be that a rooftop park would do some service in one of these things, but the only building that's going to be redeveloped that could do that would be the area at the Cloudera site. So it does seem frustrating that in a way we're solving problems for the city by getting closer to the arena numbers by advocating for density, and yet I would like to also advocate for mitigation of the effects of that density.
Understood.
Okay. Anyone else who would like to speak? Oh, I see Keith. Keith, you have the floor now.
Yeah, I want to follow up from Angela's discussion about transportation. is that including bike transportation? So in any
In terms of
changes?
planning for it?
Yeah,
Yeah, certainly. I mean, so we're at a very conceptual level with this plan, and eventually we need to get down to like literally the street level, right? Like what's happening on each street. So, you know, we have a ways to go to get to the specificity of things like that. The specificity of, is it a roundabout? Is it a traffic circle? Is it a speed bump? I mean, that's the level we need to get to through the continued refinement of the plan.
because there was a lot of neighborhood support for traffic calming on Park
Mhm.
Boulevard.
Yep. We
And
need
so
to
who's
develop
going to take that up? Is that something that NVCAP will own, or is that something that the council will have to own?
So we need to get direction on what direction we're headed, but eventually that needs to be part of the final plan documents. So that's why we need to do the studies and all those things to figure out, how many trips, what's the right treatment. So that will be happening in the springtime.
And how about the Loma Verde bike crossing also? That council will have to direct you to do that, or is that already in your?
I believe it's already in our plans, and so we would want to include it in this plan because I think it's already in. I forget which city plan it is already referenced, so we want to bring that into this one as well.
Okay. You also stated something about the park impact fees and how that is a detriment to building housing, and I don't know. I've never heard that. Do you have any studies that show that?
Well, there certainly are studies about overall the different impact fees that California cities charge and the impact on housing. I think what I'm trying to say is that I think Waldeck is saying, well, all this housing is being built elsewhere and people are doing the fees. And what I'm saying is we don't actually build that much housing as a city. And so I don't know if we can say that. It's hard to say that, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
we haven't built that much housing over the past part of the RENA cycle. And so part of
But
the
I don't think
challenge
that's
could
being
be the
driven by
fees.
park impact fees. I think that's driven
No,
by.
I'm not saying it's driven by park impact fees, but I'm certainly saying that part of the staff analysis and the strategic economics analysis is the expense of the park fees could make the housing financially infeasible. And what I hear Waldeck is saying is, well, it's financially feasible elsewhere. And I'm kind of saying, well, we'd see limited housing development. And certainly when it comes to the size of the development, where someone has to dedicate parkland, which is 50 units and greater, we don't see a lot of proposals for those sizes of developments.
But that's really driven by the fact that offices are very lucrative, and that's really what's hurting more than the fact that the park impact fees, I think, are a small.
I'm not making an assertion about anything that's driving anything. All I am saying is that we don't have that much housing development in Palo Alto. And so I think Waldeck was kind of saying other parts of Palo Alto are getting it, and we're saying the NVCAP is not. And I'm saying, well, we have limited housing development in Palo Alto.
Well, if you look at SOFA, there's a big park up there.
Yes, but what I'm saying is right now, in today's market, based on financial feasibility, we have limited housing development in Palo Alto. And so we're not trying to give one part of Palo Alto less parkland. I think we're talking about the same thing, but we're talking about two different ways of looking at it and a little bit of apples and oranges.
Yeah, I just think what the neighborhood is saying is that we're adding a bunch of people here. We really should add the parkland that goes along with those people.
Absolutely understand that point, and I'm not arguing against it.
Okay, thank you.
So I see two hands. First one is Angela, one more time.
Thank you. Yeah, so you mentioned, Claire mentioned that it's if it's a subdivision, then the requirement is 5 acres per 1,000 people. And I'm curious what constitutes.
It's a subdivision over 50 units.
So clearly we're going to have over 50 units here. So what would stop this from being a subdivision that would require 5 acres per 1,000 people?
So you typically subdivide a parcel when you're building condos so that you can sell them off individually. So if someone's building an apartment that is not apartment building that could be greater than 50 units, it's not a subdivision. In addition, we're talking about development by development. So we're not talking about the entire NVCAP area being a subdivision. We're saying I'm so-and-so and I have a proposal for 51 condos and I'm subdividing the parcel. And then I need to dedicate the 5 acres per 1,000 ratio for my particular development.
So it has to be, not 100% to me, but so it has to be a single developer who does it, who decides I want to build this many condos, it can't be apartments, it has to be condos?
I think what Claire was trying to show is that our current development standards, if someone comes in the door today and says, I would like to build 51 condos, then this is the standard we apply via our code to that development. And if it is apartments, there's a different standard, which is or even if it's not apartments at all, it could be under commercial development, then there's a standard whereby that development pays a fee to support the additional park space. We're just trying to give context of this is how we have these aspirational goals in the city, and this is how they've been operationalized in the code to have context for, NVCAP. So NVCAP could continue that, could change that, could have different standards to apply.
So it's just that apartments are considered different from condos when it comes to the amount of park space expected.
Yes.
Okay, and that's regarding renting versus buying. Is that to understand correctly, or is it?
Well, you could actually develop apartments and subdivide. It's really about the subdivision. I mean, some folks will develop an apartment building, but they'll create a subdivision so that eventually they can they have the option to sell those apartments as condos in the future. So by creating that subdivision, even for a rental, it would trigger the parkland dedication requirement.
Okay. I guess I don't quite understand the meaning of subdivision, but okay.
Well, it's like
ownership units. When you create ownership units, then it's triggering the parkland dedication requirements. So whether it's a condo or a single family home, if it's ownership units, then it triggers the parkland dedication. The other side is the park fees are just for basically if you have an existing project, existing home or existing apartments and you're rebuilding what you've got, we're not going to charge you parkland dedication, or you're not going to be, a parkland dedication wouldn't apply to you because you're not creating a brand new parcel or a brand new living units. You're just replacing, like a single family home is not going to have parkland dedication when you replace it. It's creating new parcels.
For purchase.
And I think oftentimes in our general common speak, when we think about a subdivision, we think about like a development of homes like in suburbs. A subdivision is not that. A subdivision is literally subdividing the parcel. So in this case, a condo building, subdividing it so each little unit can be sold individually. And it's its own kind of piece of land, even though some of them are in the air. Anyhow, so that's a little bit of planning for you. We're getting a little bit past time. We'll take a few more questions and then we're going to close out the meeting. Waldeck?
Yes, so since there are kind of goals that we are setting for our area, and then there are rules that are being implemented for different projects, are we going to create the mechanism to actually implement those goals? So that would be part of like what it's going to change the zoning requirements, like, okay.
Yeah, so we would develop a zoning and other code requirements that would enact the NVCAP ultimately. So even like as Keith was talking about, well, like the traffic calming, it might be that, there's a connection between redevelopment and the implementation of those things, or those could be part of a separate plan that we might implement as the city, because it's the city's roads to implement the traffic calming. Likewise, there could be, we talked today even with our city attorney about a mechanism to ensure that if someone's building office, that maybe they have to build the housing first. If it's some of those parcels where we want to see office and housing or retail and housing, that the housing comes first and you don't get the commercial part until you've done the housing, for example. And there's ways we can use our code and our zoning to implement that and make sure that it's real. And if you want to build it, you got to do this, this thing.
Okay, so that will be the next step, basically create a set of rules to make sure that whatever we come up with actually is going to be
implemented. Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. I see Kirsten and Doria.
Oh, quick question. So the parkland requirement is based on ownership, not numbers of people living here. That's new to me. So could you explain that maybe?
So the parkland dedication is based on units. So
it doesn't depend on ownership or renters?
No, it does. I think we were just talking about that. So there's two different things. There's park impact fees and there's parkland dedication. Park impact fees just apply to all projects that have no subdivision. And that's just something that you pay towards the larger pot for the city. And parkland dedication, specifically if there's, the threshold is 50 units. So if you're over 50 units, you have to give land. If you're less than 50 units or 50 units or less, then you have the option to either pay fees 100% or do a combination of parkland dedication and fees.
Sure. That's about fees, but our expectations about how much park we have per resident is not based on ownership or rental. It's just based on the number of people we have in this community that we want to provide for. Is that correct?
Well, I think we're talking about, there's like there's three different things that we've mentioned tonight. I think one is the parkland dedication. In the code, it specifically references 5 acres per 1,000 residents. So that's the parkland dedication standards in the code. Then separate from that, we've got the parks master plan, and then we have the comprehensive plan. And those have different things that are written into those different policies. And yes, the comp plan and the parks plan references what we're doing generally for everyone in the city.
I think to your point,
Doria,
so
do we make a distinction when we anticipate and plan for how much parkland we need per resident? Do we make a distinction between whether they are renters or owners? That's my question. I'm sorry.
You're asking if we make that distinction in the plan?
When in the city of Palo Alto, when we plan for parkland per resident, do we make a distinction between owners and renters? Because
no.
Okay, thanks. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you very much.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, Doria.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep. Kirsten?
I have 3 quick questions, I think. Is there a comparison of how underparked different neighborhoods are within that half-mile radius or mile radius?
I would have to look at our Parks and Rec folk and see if we have that analysis.
So that might be something Keith could answer or have access to.
And I can just mention, Kristen, that they're in the Parks and Rec plan. There are great graphics and maps that show the circles of coverage for all of this.
I'll look for that.
Yeah, it's in there.
If anyone can cue me with a link, I would very much appreciate it. Second, there's 2 things that are kind of barriers to us actually getting a plan that works. One is this new proposal, and I'd be interested in any thoughts on, are we just at hopeless, or I don't know. And then my second question is, what kind of traffic issues, if we're going for one of the higher residence plans, would make that plan unworkable? Is there any barriers beyond which you have to say, no, we can't do that many units?
Well, I think that what could happen, so with regards to 200 Portage, I really can't offer much insight because I learned about it through an email of the submission of the proposal. So, just to say that we're in that same boat. And so.
Yeah, I get it.
I don't want to say too much. So I'll just leave it at that. We learned the same way and we sent the same message to you all that we received to share that with you when we got that news. As far as, thresholds, what we look at when we'll do the analysis, at least for the CEQA, the environmental review, that will reveal different levels of issues that could arise from trips that are taken, and we'll analyze the environmental impact of those trips. And then CEQA will give us advice about how we how we could mitigate those impacts. And sometimes there are significant and unavoidable impacts that are disclosed through CEQA that say, well, no matter what you do, the impact of this action will still be very significant and unavoidable. It might be significant, but you can mitigate it. It might be less than significant. But that's for the environmental review. from a policy standpoint, the city council might look at, let's say, the traffic data and information and say, gosh, the impact on our level of service, which is a local policy standard from these developments, is beyond what we find tenable as a city, and we don't want to support this in the plan. Staff, can you do X to mitigate it? X could be reducing development. X could be requiring really strict TDM for the developments that go in there. There are different ways we can try to ensure that there's less of an impact. So the answer is yes, but it isn't like it stops us from like the state saying you can't do it. It is in our court to figure out what we think is supportable as a city. Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for your time, and I want to know.
Can I give a quick answer to Kirsten about the?
Yes.
Yeah. So in the Parks Master Plan, we want everyone to be within a half mile of a park, walking distance, preferably a quarter mile. And so around Bull Park, that area is fairly well covered because within a quarter mile. If you go over closer to Page Mill, in the master plan, they do show that that's within a quarter mile of Sarah Wallace Park, which is this tiny, tiny park, but you'd have to jaywalk to do that. So the consultant didn't do a very good job on it. So the gist of it is apart from Bull Park, the bulk of the NVCAP area is a half mile or more from a parkland. So the NVCAP area is underparked. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we agree. And I want to make it clear, and I know it's a lot of confusing stuff about parks. The staff is not against the aspirational goal of the 5 acres per thousand or 4 acres or whatever acres it is that we think is the aspirational goal for the city. Our position is that what is financially feasible for individual developments to carry is going to be less than reaching that standard, which doesn't mean that we can't reach that standard, but it does mean that we don't feel the liberty to just draw green patches on various parcels and declare that this person's land is going to become a park. I think that is outside of what we can just do and what we can certainly promise would happen. If we're proposing larger developments and saying there's going to be parkland dedication in regards to that development, I think there we have some liberty to do that. And it'll ultimately up to the PTC and council to decide what they would like to see. And then finally, I know we don't like to hear it, but it's the truth, up to the owners of that property, if under the conditions we set, they would like to redevelop their land, triggering the need for them to dedicate the parkland. And if they deign to do that, then the parkland will continue to not exist. Gail, since you didn't get a second round, we'll give you the last word tonight, and then we'll break and we'll reconvene tomorrow as the planning commission meeting. Gail?
It's a simple question. Strategic economics, will they be involved in further studies of the plan after it goes to PTC?
Yes.
Will they also be involved in the environmental work?
They may not really be needed during the environmental work. I don't really think they would have a role there. The environmental review firm is David J. Powers, and that is a separate firm from Strategic Economics. And they're part of the team that's managed by our prime. So, but I don't think that their scope would include the environmental review.
And then the plan itself will have an economic feasibility component, correct? That's assessing the alternatives as to
and assessing the impact on the city's how could, because there's public improvements that are needed as well as part of this, and so
and then also the issue of identifying potential funding sources, which is what Angela brought up as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, that will be addressed. It will be addressed, right?
Yes, I believe that's part of their scope of work. I do have to say, we are continuing to refine the scope of work to make sure it is within the budget that we have, and we are still needing to find some things to cut. So I will offer that. We still have not gotten the project within the budget that we have available. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all again for your time and energy, and I look forward to hearing you at the PTC tomorrow. Again, please, you can email the PTC directly, and if you don't know their email, we can send it to you, or you can send it to us and we'll forward it to them. But we do hope that you all will participate, and we just thank you so much for your time and energy. It's really quite meaningful.
Thank you so much. Thank you
all of you people and your staffs that we don't maybe see on the Zoom calls, but I know there's lots of people working on this, and we really do appreciate you guys and enjoy the process of partnering with you.
Working under so many different constraints, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all, and whatever happens to 200 Portage, I think we'll have a really good plan. So. We'll keep working on it. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.